Hi there and welcome to the channel. Now it is Tuesday and that means tags, and this week Aaron Facer has been kind enough to tag me with the "What makes a classic" tag. This was originally propagated by a publisher, Macmillan I believe. Links to Aaron's video and the original one are in the description. Now before I get into the prompts, of which there are 8, I'm going to address the basic question of what makes a classic a classic? Okay, let's begin. Okay, so I'm going to offer a definition of a classic that is extrinsic, and it's simply this: it's any work of literature that has received sustained critical interest from readers over a long period of time. And what this means is that it's quite possible for you as a reader to read a work that's been designated a classic and say, yes, this may be a classic, but I didn't enjoy it. It's not as good as this book, which is not considered a classic. It's perfectly fine to do that with my definition as your guide. Now, as part of my studies, I make a further distinction when it comes to classics, and that's between canonical works and those that are not. So the best way to demonstrate this is with some examples. So I've got some Gothic novels with me. So The Monk is a classic, but it's also a canonical Gothic novel. That is, it would be very strange to write a book all about Gothic fiction without mentioning this work. Then we have others here. Dracula, Frankenstein. Of course, you'll be familiar with these. Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Then a foundational text, really. For Gothic fiction, it's The Mysteries of Udolpho, Melmoth the Wanderer, and finally, where it all began in English at least, in 1764, Horace Walpole's The Castle of Otranto. So, classics that are canonical, they enjoy elevated status because of just how much influence they've had on a particular genre. Then there would be classics that are Gothic novels, but are not canonical. Master of Ballantrae, James Hogg, Private Memoirs and Confessions of a Justified Sinner, Caleb Williams, which is magnificent. And you see, this is my point, that I enjoyed this just as much as Frankenstein or Dracula, but it's not canonical. Wuthering Heights, and finally, Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre. Now, there's also the question of these modern classics, and I'll just grab a couple and talk about those for a second. Okay, I've just got 2 to show you, and they are Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin and James Agee or Agee, A Death in the Family. Now, these don't meet my definition of a classic because I've checked on Google Scholar and there is not sustained critical interest in these works. There are just a handful of scholars writing about these books right now. I think there are other factors at play. In the case of James Baldwin, he is a major writer and his best work deserves classic status, but what I think publishers tend to do is, in this case, just label everything he did as a classic, regardless of its actual quality or influence or the amount of interest it has sparked. In the Agee case, it's even harder to work out why he's not a major name. I think it's that he had a long, productive career, he was well respected, he was published by major publishers, perhaps he was nominated for some prizes, and that is why this book is labelled a classic. And then we have works which are not designated classics, but what scholars do, like myself, is read through these and try basically to make the case that they are worthy of sustained critical interest and indeed may become classics one day because of such a renewed interest. One example being Denton Welsh, who I wrote my thesis about. I didn't write about this one, but there has in recent years been a Penguin Classics issued of this book. Okay, so it's come from nowhere, as it were, and now enjoys classic status. I actually wrote about this one, A Voice Through a Cloud, which I think is the pick of his novels. This one is highly autobiographical. And then we have Maiden Voyage, which is unlikely to be designated a classic. There's very little interest in this book. Okay, I hope that clarifies my position. Having got that out of the way, let's move on to the prompts. First, a classic with a gripping plot and universal themes. I'm not really interested in either of these two things, particularly the second one. Universal themes. Isn't any theme universal? A novel about two friends, friendship, a universal theme. A novel about loneliness, okay? A universal theme. A novel about greed and ambition, a universal, okay. You get the idea. This phrase could be safely retired. As for gripping plots, I'm going to choose a crime novel, or as Americans call them, a mystery, and that is Ross MacDonald's The Galton Case. This is absolutely superb. I promise you, you won't see the twist coming. It's just one of the best plotted novels I've ever read. Ross MacDonald, a Canadian crime writer. If you've never checked out his work, his Lou Archer series comes highly recommended by myself. Okay, next, a subversive classic. Now my shelves are absolutely crowded with candidates for this prompt, so I've chosen not one, but 3 examples. First up, one of my favourite writers, Genet with Our Lady of the Flowers. This is a highly subversive book with its celebration of murder, criminality and homosexuality. An excellent read. Then Burroughs' Naked Lunch, which attacks all of society's institutions and exposes their hypocrisy and their moral bankruptcy. This is a great work. And lastly, what Burroughs does to American society, Bernhard does to Austrian society. No institution is spared. His withering critique. So those are my subversive choices. Next, a classic that defines a time and place. I was really scratching my head over this prompt, but then, browsing the shelves, it hit me. Mark Twain, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, because this work helped to forge a distinctly American literary identity. Excellent book. Next, a complex, groundbreaking classic. I'm going to choose the works of Samuel Beckett, his dramas and his novels. And of his novels, I particularly love What? And in this novel, we see one of the principal features of Beckett's work. Again and again, we approach the limits of language, and that for me is Beckett's outstanding contribution to literature. He shows us the limits of what can be said, really like no other writer. Okay, next. A classic with archetypal characters. This really had me scratching my head once again. The only one I've come up with is William Blake. His poetry is full of archetypes: the divine child, the divine feminine, the journey, the devil, the tree of life and knowledge. So yes, Blake's work. Okay, next. The classic that's a complete one-off. Well, there's only one candidate for me, and that is Jorge Luis Borges. Here we have Labyrinths, but I could have chosen his fictions. There truly is no one like him before or since. Many have come and tried to claim the crown, but so far his many imitators have all fallen rather flat on their faces. Yes, there's just nothing quite like his stories, is there? What a major contribution a single individual made to our literature in the 20th century. Bless you, Jorge. Next, the classic we quote from all the time. Well, in my case, it's definitely George Orwell's 1984. There are so many great concepts in here. If I'm not voicing those concepts, I'm thinking about them as I go about my daily life. Groupthink, doublethink, duck speak, double plus good, the thought police, the young spies, on and on it goes. Okay, next. The book you think will be rediscovered as a classic or regarded as a classic in the future. Right, we can now return to the definition I offered at the beginning of this video, and it'll be rather easy for me to identify future classics because I said what the criteria was: sustained critical interest from readers, over a long period and inside the university. In the last 3 years, I've noticed that Alice Munro's work is attracting a significant amount of interest from the undergraduates and the graduates in the department. So I predict that in the future, her output will come to be regarded as classic. So there we have it. That completes this tag video, and all that remains is for me to bid you farewell in time-honoured fashion. So until the next time, be safe, be strong, nanu nanu.